Before any theory about moving the Moai can be considered, the physical reality must be confronted. These statues are not abstract symbols, they are objects governed by mass, gravity, friction, and terrain. Any explanation that ignores these constraints collapses under its own assumptions. The average Moai weighs between 12 and 15 tons. Larger examples exceed 50 tons, with the heaviest approaching 75. These figures are not estimates from legend, they are measured values based on density and volume. Even by modern standards, relocating such objects is non-trivial. The terrain of Easter Island complicates matters further. The island is not flat. It is composed of volcanic rock, sharp ridges, loose soil, and abrupt elevation changes. Paths between the quarry at Rano Riraku and coastal platforms rise and fall unpredictably. Slopes vary in angle. Surfaces alternate between grass, stone, and compacted earth. Dragging a massive stone object across such ground would generate enormous friction. That friction would leave evidence: deep grooves, crushed vegetation, compacted soil layers, yet extensive surveys along suspected routes reveal no consistent drag marks. Where shallow erosion exists, it aligns with natural water flow and wind patterns rather than mechanical stress. Rolling theories face similar problems. Rollers require smooth, durable logs, replaced continuously as they break under load. But archaeological evidence suggests that large trees were scarce during the period of peak Moai movement. Even if timber had once been abundant, repeated rolling would have left behind fragments, wear patterns, and disturbed soil. These traces are largely absent. More critically, rollers fail on uneven ground. When a roller meets a rock or slope, weight shifts abruptly. The system destabilizes. Controlling a 50-ton statue under such conditions would require extraordinary precision and constant correction, far beyond what simple rolling implies. Slope introduces another constraint: gravity. On inclines, dragging or rolling becomes exponentially more dangerous. A loss of control would not merely halt movement, it would destroy the statue. Many fallen Moai show fractures consistent with tipping rather than sliding, suggesting that balance, not traction, was the primary challenge. This observation redirects attention to the statues themselves. Moai are not symmetrical blocks. Their bases are narrow, their backs curve gently, their weight is distributed forward. These characteristics are not ideal for dragging, but they are ideal for controlled rocking. A forward-leaning object resists falling backward. A curved base allows pivoting rather than scraping. Such features imply intentional design choices. The statues were shaped not only to stand, but to move. Still, recognizing design does not explain execution. Coordinated rocking requires timing, communication, and collective effort. It demands an organized group capable of sustaining rhythm over long distances. This raises questions not of physics, but of society. How many people were involved? How was coordination achieved without written instruction? How were routes chosen and prepared without leaving obvious traces? These questions reveal a deeper issue. The problem of Moai transport is not a single mechanical puzzle. It is a system involving environment, object design, human organization, and cultural purpose. Physics alone cannot solve it, but neither can mythology. To move forward, we must examine the land itself, not just as terrain, but as a constraint that shapes every possible method. That examination begins with the quarry in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Isolated by thousands of kilometers of open water, stands a place that continues to challenge modern understanding. Easter Island, known locally as Rapa Nui, is one of the most remote inhabited locations on Earth. And yet, scattered across its landscape are nearly 1,000 massive stone statues, Moai, some standing upright on ceremonial platforms. Others lying unfinished or fallen along ancient routes. Each statue weighs tens of tons. Some exceed 70 tons. They were carved from volcanic rock using tools made of stone. There were no metal implements, no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals, no written records describing the process. Still, the statues were not only carved, they were transported over uneven terrain. across slopes, ridges, and valleys, from quarries deep within the island to platforms near the coast. Many were erected upright with precision. Some were placed kilometers from their origin. The central mystery is not artistic skill. It is movement. How did a small prehistoric society, isolated from external influence, relocate objects heavier than modern trucks without machinery, engines, or advanced infrastructure? For decades, the most common assumption was brute force. Large groups of people pulling statues horizontally using wooden sleds or rollers. This idea seemed intuitive, but when examined closely, it raises immediate problems. The island's environment does not support large-scale timber use. Archaeological evidence suggests limited forest resources, particularly during the period when most Moai were moved. The terrain itself is irregular and rocky, unsuitable for smooth rolling or dragging. More importantly, there is a lack of physical traces, no deep grooves, no compressed paths, no remains of massive wooden systems. Despite this, the statues are where they are. Some Moai stand upright, facing inland, as if watching over ancient communities. Others lie face down along routes between quarry and platform, suggesting collapse during transport rather than abandonment after arrival. Their positions appear intentional, not random. The statues themselves offer clues. Many have narrow bases and a forward-leaning posture. Their centers of mass are not centered but subtly offset. This design is unusual if the intention was static placement alone. It suggests movement may have been considered during carving, not as an afterthought. Modern experiments have demonstrated that upright statues can be moved by rocking them side to side, walking them forward with coordinated pulling. These demonstrations are compelling, but they are not definitive. They are short, controlled tests, performed on replicas, under modern conditions. They prove possibility, not history. And that distinction matters. Because Easter Island is not simply an engineering puzzle, it is a cultural one. The movement of Moai may have been as much ritual as labor, as much symbolic as practical. The process itself may have mattered more than efficiency. What remains undeniable is this: the statues were moved, repeatedly, deliberately, across an environment that offers no easy solutions. This series does not aim to provide a single, final answer. Instead, it examines evidence, experiments, limitations, and unanswered questions, step by step. The mystery of Easter Island is not defined by ignorance, but by restraint, by what the evidence allows us to say, and what it refuses to confirm. And as with many ancient achievements, the truth may lie not in lost technology, but in lost understanding. Before any theory about moving the Moai can be considered, the physical reality must be confronted. These statues are not abstract symbols, they are objects governed by mass, gravity, friction, and terrain. Any explanation that ignores these constraints collapses under its own assumptions. The average Moai weighs between 12 and 15 tons. Larger examples exceed 50 tons, with the heaviest approaching 75. These figures are not estimates from legend, they are measured values based on density and volume. Even by modern standards, relocating such objects is non-trivial. The terrain of Easter Island complicates matters further. The island is not flat. It is composed of volcanic rock, sharp ridges, loose soil, and abrupt elevation changes. Paths between the quarry at Rano Riraku and coastal platforms rise and fall unpredictably. Slopes vary in angle. Surfaces alternate between grass, stone, and compacted earth. Dragging a massive stone object across such ground would generate enormous friction. That friction would leave evidence: deep grooves, crushed vegetation, compacted soil layers, yet extensive surveys along suspected routes reveal no consistent drag marks. Where shallow erosion exists, it aligns with natural water flow and wind patterns rather than mechanical stress. Rolling theories face similar problems. Rollers require smooth, durable logs, replaced continuously as they break under load. But archaeological evidence suggests that large trees were scarce during the period of peak Moai movement. Even if timber had once been abundant, repeated rolling would have left behind fragments, wear patterns, and disturbed soil. These traces are largely absent. More critically, rollers fail on uneven ground. When a roller meets a rock or slope, weight shifts abruptly. The system destabilizes. Controlling a 50-ton statue under such conditions would require extraordinary precision and constant correction, far beyond what simple rolling implies. Slope introduces another constraint: gravity. On inclines, dragging or rolling becomes exponentially more dangerous. A loss of control would not merely halt movement, it would destroy the statue. Many fallen moai show fractures consistent with tipping rather than sliding, suggesting that balance, not traction, was the primary challenge. This observation redirects attention to the statues themselves. Moai are not symmetrical blocks. Their bases are narrow. Their backs curve gently. Their weight is distributed forward. These characteristics are not ideal for dragging, but they are ideal for controlled rocking. A forward-leaning object resists falling backward. A curved base allows pivoting rather than scraping. Such features imply intentional design choices. The statues were shaped not only to stand, but to move. Still, recognizing design does not explain execution. Coordinated rocking requires timing, communication, and collective effort. It demands an organized group capable of sustaining rhythm over long distances. This raises questions not of physics, but of society. How many people were involved? How was coordination achieved without written instruction? How were routes chosen and prepared without leaving obvious traces? These questions reveal a deeper issue. The problem of moai transport is not a single mechanical puzzle. It is a system involving environment, object design, human organization, and cultural purpose. Physics alone cannot solve it, but neither can mythology. To move forward, we must examine the land itself, not just as terrain, but as a constraint that shapes every possible method. That examination begins with the quarry. Any serious attempt to understand how the moai were transported must begin at their point of origin. Nearly all statues on Easter Island were carved from the same source, the volcanic crater of Rano Raraku. This quarry is not simply a place of extraction. It is a record of intention. More than 400 unfinished moai remain at Rano Raraku. Some are partially carved, still fused to the bedrock. Others are fully shaped but never removed. Many stand upright along the crater's inner slopes, buried to their torsos by centuries of sediment, giving the false impression that only heads were carved. In reality, full bodies lie beneath the soil. What matters is how these statues were carved. The moai were sculpted in a prone position, face up, directly into the volcanic tuff. The front was completed first, face, torso, arms. Only later was the back separated from the rock. This sequence allowed carvers to control balance and shape before the statue was ever freed. Crucially, the base of each statue was shaped deliberately before removal. It was not left rough. It was curved, tapered, and smoothed. This work would have been unnecessary if the statue were meant only to be dragged horizontally. But it becomes essential if the statue were intended to be stood upright and rocked into motion. Several unfinished moai reveal another important detail: asymmetry. The left and right sides are not always identical. In some cases, the center of mass is subtly shifted forward. This makes the statue naturally want to tip forward, not backward. Such imbalance is a liability for static monuments, but an advantage for controlled movement. Around the quarry, there is also a notable absence of infrastructure. No large ramps, no heavy anchor points, no evidence of sled construction. Instead, the landscape appears minimally altered. The statues seem to have been removed and guided away without extensive modification of the terrain. Even more telling are the statues that fell during transport. Many moai lie face down along ancient routes leading away from Rano Raraku. Their positions suggest collapse during upright movement rather than abandonment on sleds. When a tall, narrow object loses balance while being rocked forward, it falls face first. This pattern appears repeatedly. Some statues were abandoned mid-route but left upright, as if temporarily paused. Others reached platforms and were erected successfully. The quarry thus represents not only the beginning of the journey, but its first testing ground. The carvers did not simply create stone figures and then ask how to move them. They shaped the statues with movement in mind from the earliest stages. Design and transport were integrated, not separate problems. This realization changes the nature of the mystery. The question is no longer whether ancient Rapa Nui people could move the Moai. The quarry shows they expected to. The real question becomes how that expectation was fulfilled consistently, across generations, without written records, metal tools, or permanent infrastructure. To answer that, we must leave the quarry and examine what happened once the statues stood free, upright, unstable, and ready to move. Among all proposed explanations, one stands out for how closely it aligns with the physical evidence left behind by the Moai themselves. Often referred to as the walking Moai hypothesis, it suggests that the statues were transported upright, moved forward by rocking them side to side in a controlled, rhythmic motion. At first glance, the idea sounds improbable, but when examined through physics rather than intuition, it becomes surprisingly plausible. An upright object with a narrow base and a forward-leaning center of mass does not behave like a rigid block. When pulled alternately from the left and right, it can pivot on its base, advancing incrementally without being dragged. Each motion is small, but repeated thousands of times. It results in meaningful distance. Modern experiments have demonstrated this effect using full-scale replicas, with 3 teams, one pulling from each side, one stabilizing from behind. Statues weighing several tons have been moved forward in a controlled manner. The motion resembles walking more than sliding. Observers have noted that the statues appear to step forward, rocking gently but remaining upright. This method explains several otherwise puzzling observations. First, it accounts for the lack of deep drag marks. Rocking concentrates force at the base, not across the ground. Soil compression would be localized and shallow, easily erased by erosion over centuries. Second, it explains why so many fallen Moai lie face down. If balance is lost during forward motion, the statue tips forward, not backward. This matches the archaeological record. Third, it aligns with statue design. The curved base, tapered shape, and forward lean all support controlled pivoting. These features are unnecessary for static monuments, but essential for walking motion. However, experimental success does not equal historical proof. Modern demonstrations are performed on short distances, under controlled conditions, with prepared teams. Ancient Rapa Nui transport would have required coordination over kilometers of uneven terrain, across slopes, under variable weather conditions, and without modern safety margins. There are also unanswered questions. How many people were required to maintain rhythm and control? How were commands communicated without written language? How did teams manage fatigue during days or weeks of transport? How were statues stabilized during rest periods? Some experiments assume continuous movement, but the terrain of Easter Island suggests frequent pauses would have been necessary. Yet stopping an upright, unstable object introduces risk. Restarting movement increases it. Additionally, not all Moai share identical proportions. Some are broader, others heavier. The walking method may not apply uniformly. Critics argue that experiments prove feasibility only under idealized assumptions. Supporters counter that ancient societies excelled at coordinated labor without formal instruction, using rhythm, chant, and ritual to synchronize effort. This brings the discussion beyond mechanics and into culture. If moving a Moai was not merely construction, but ceremony, an act tied to identity, ancestry, and social cohesion, then efficiency may not have been the priority. Precision, symbolism, and collective participation may have mattered more than speed. The walking hypothesis does not solve every problem, but it narrows the gap between what is physically possible and what is archaeologically visible. It suggests that the solution may not have required lost technology, only lost knowledge. Yet even this explanation leaves something unresolved. Because if the statues walked, then movement was not just an engineering task, it was a social performance. And to understand that performance, we must examine the people who carried it out. If the Moai were moved upright, step by step, then transport was not simply a matter of strength, It required coordination, timing, and shared understanding. This shifts the problem away from tools and toward people. The society of Rapa Nui was not large by modern standards, but it was organized. Communities were structured around extended families and clans, each associated with specific territories and ceremonial platforms. The Moai were not generic monuments, they represented ancestors. Their movement was therefore not a neutral task. It was an act charged with meaning. In such a context, coordination does not require written instructions. It requires rhythm. Across many non-literate societies, complex collective labor is synchronized through chant, call and response, and repetitive motion. Rhythm creates timing. Timing creates stability. Stability allows precise control over heavy objects without constant verbal direction. A rocking statue moved by alternating pulls would depend on such rhythm to remain balanced. This framework helps explain how large groups could act as a single system. Each pull does not need to be individually calculated if the group moves together. The statue responds predictably to consistent input. Over time, the group learns its behavior through repetition, not theory. Importantly, this method also distributes effort. No single individual bears the full strain. Responsibility is collective. Fatigue can be managed by rotating participants without halting progress entirely. This would be essential over long distances. There is also evidence that transport routes were socially embedded. Moai often align with paths connecting settlements and ceremonial sites. These paths were not engineered roads but lived spaces, used repeatedly for movement, ritual, and communication. Transporting a statue along such a path would have been a public event, witnessed and reinforced by the community. This visibility matters. A statue that walks through the landscape is not hidden labor. It is spectacle. It reinforces shared identity and ancestral continuity. The act of moving the Moai may have been as important as the final placement. The journey itself becomes ritual. This perspective explains why efficiency may not have been paramount. Slower movement allows control, reduces risk, and increases participation. A method that takes longer but involves more people strengthens social bonds. In a small, isolated society, cohesion is survival. It also reframes failure. Fallen Moai along routes may not represent catastrophe or incompetence. They may mark moments where conditions changed, weather, manpower, social priorities, or where ritual ceased to align with practical necessity. Abandonment does not always imply inability. Still, social explanation alone cannot replace mechanics. Coordination does not eliminate gravity. Ritual does not negate mass. The statues still had to obey physical laws. What it does suggest is that the solution to the Moai mystery lies at the intersection of physics and culture. Neither discipline alone is sufficient. The Rapa Nui did not separate engineering from meaning. For them, moving stone may have been inseparable from moving memory, authority, and identity across the land. To fully assess this possibility, we must examine where the statues ended their journey, and what their final positions reveal about intent. To understand why the Moai were moved, we must examine where they were meant to stand. The final positions of the statues are not random endpoints, they are deliberate conclusions to a long process that began at the quarry. Most completed Moai were placed on stone platforms known as Ahu, typically located near the coast. These platforms were not simple foundations. They were carefully constructed ceremonial sites, often containing burial chambers and aligned with specific clan territories. The placement of a Moai on an Ahu transformed it from an object into a presence. One of the most striking features of the Moai is their orientation. With very few exceptions, they face inland, away from the sea. This detail undermines many early assumptions that the statues were meant to guide sailors or mark coastal boundaries. Instead, their gaze was directed toward villages, fields, and communal spaces. This orientation suggests function rather than decoration. If the Moai represented ancestors, then facing inland allowed them to watch over the living. Their presence was protective, symbolic, and continuous. In this context, transport becomes an act of relocation, moving authority from quarry to community. The platforms themselves reinforce this interpretation. Many AHU are positioned to command a wide view of inland territory. They are elevated slightly above their surroundings, creating a visual hierarchy. The Moai, once erected, would dominate the landscape, visible from great distances. Erecting a statue upright on an AHU required precise control. The final placement demanded more than raw strength. It required alignment, timing, and balance, skills consistent with the controlled movement implied by the walking hypothesis. Importantly, the platforms show little evidence of heavy construction machinery or ramps. There are no remains of large earthen structures that would suggest hoisting from a horizontal position. Instead, the transition from movement to standing appears smooth and direct. This continuity supports the idea that the statues arrived upright and remained so. Some moai were later topped with large red stone cylinders known as pukao. These additions increased height and visual impact, but also introduced additional weight. The fact that they were added after placement suggests confidence in stability and control. Not all statues reached their destination. Fallen moai lie along routes between quarry and platform, often oriented face down. These statues never became ancestors. They remained in transit, unfinished journeys frozen in stone. Their locations are revealing. They are rarely found near platforms, and rarely near the quarry. Instead, they cluster along routes that connect the two. This pattern reinforces the idea that transport was a defined process with identifiable stages. The final positions of the moai do not answer how they were moved, but they clarify why. The statues were not meant to travel endlessly. Their journey had purpose, direction, and conclusion. Movement was a means, not an end. By examining where the moai stopped, we see that transport was not merely logistical. It was transformative. A stone figure became an ancestor only when it reached its place among the living. And yet, even with destination and purpose understood, a final uncertainty remains. Why did the process stop? At some point, the long tradition of carving and transporting moai came to an end. The quarry fell silent. Tools were left where they lay. Statues remained half-finished, still attached to the bedrock. Others lay abandoned along routes they would never complete. Understanding why this happened is as important as understanding how the statues were moved in the first place. The most common explanation focuses on environmental strain. Over centuries, the island's limited resources were placed under increasing pressure. Population growth, agricultural expansion, and the demands of monument construction all required land, wood, and labor. As trees became scarce, the island's ecology shifted. Soil erosion increased, crop yields declined, life became more precarious. But environmental decline alone does not explain the timing or nature of the collapse. If moai transport depended primarily on wood for rollers or sleds, then deforestation would be decisive. However, if statues were moved upright using ropes and coordinated movement, the loss of forests would have been less immediately crippling. Rope fibers could be made from smaller plants. The technique would remain viable even as large trees disappeared. This suggests that the end of moai construction was not caused by a single technical failure, but by broader social change. Archaeological evidence points to increasing competition between clans during the later period of Rapa Nui history. Defensive structures appear, settlements shift inland, the focus of ritual life changes. The authority once embodied by moai may have been challenged by new forms of power and belief. In such conditions, collective projects lose priority. Moving a moai required cooperation across extended families and clans. It demanded trust, shared purpose, and long-term planning. When social cohesion weakens, these conditions erode. Even if the knowledge to move statues remained, the willingness to do so may not have. There is also evidence that some moai were deliberately toppled after standing for generations. This act is often interpreted as iconoclasm, a rejection of the old order. Ancestors who once watched over communities were symbolically brought down as new social structures emerged. If this interpretation is correct, then the end of moai movement was not an accident. It was a decision. This reframes the mystery once again. The statues did not stop moving because the Rapa Nui forgot how. They stopped because the world that required their movement no longer existed. The unfinished Moai at Rano Raraku thus represent more than abandoned labor. They mark a transition, a moment when meaning shifted faster than stone could follow. This perspective aligns with a broader pattern seen across human history. Monumental construction flourishes during periods of social integration and shared identity. It declines when societies fragment or reorient their values. Easter Island is often portrayed as a cautionary tale of environmental collapse. But this narrative oversimplifies a complex story. The end of Moai transport reflects adaptation, conflict, and cultural change, not simple failure. And yet, even knowing why the statues stopped moving does not fully explain how they moved so effectively for so long. That final uncertainty remains. After centuries of speculation, experimentation, and debate, the mystery of how the Moai were moved remains unresolved, not because evidence is absent, but because it refuses to converge into a single, absolute answer. What we can say with confidence is this: the statues were not dragged blindly across the land. Their design, distribution, and final placement all point toward a method that valued balance over brute force, coordination over machinery, and social cohesion over speed. The walking Moai hypothesis aligns more closely with the physical and archaeological record than any alternative proposed so far. It explains the statue's shape, the lack of transport scars, the positions of fallen figures, and the feasibility of movement across uneven terrain. Yet plausibility is not proof. Modern experiments demonstrate that statues can be moved upright with coordinated effort, but these demonstrations occur under conditions that differ from the past. They rely on modern materials, controlled environments, and short distances. They cannot fully replicate the scale, duration, and cultural context of ancient Rapa Nui society. And that context matters. The movement of the Moai was not merely a technical operation. It was embedded in ritual, identity, and belief. The statues represented ancestors. Their journey across the island may have been as important as their destination. Movement itself may have been a ceremonial act, one that reaffirmed social bonds, authority, and continuity between generations. This perspective explains why efficiency was not paramount, why abandoned statues were not always retrieved, and why the process could endure for centuries without leaving behind the kinds of infrastructure modern engineers expect to see. It also explains why the process eventually stopped. The end of Moai transport was not the result of forgotten knowledge. It was the result of changing priorities. As environmental pressures increased and social structures shifted, the meaning that once justified collective effort eroded. When belief changed, the stones stopped moving. What remains today is not a failure of explanation, but a boundary. Archaeology can reconstruct tools, paths, and materials. Physics can model forces and motion. Anthropology can interpret ritual and social organization. But none of these disciplines alone can fully capture the lived experience of a society that understood the world differently than we do. Easter Island reminds us that ancient achievements do not always fit neatly into modern categories. They were not driven by optimization, but by purpose, not by isolated invention, but by collective action. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. The Moai stand today not as evidence of lost technology, but as evidence of a different way of thinking, one in which human coordination, belief, and persistence could move mountains of stone without machines. The statues remain silent, the method remains debated, and the mystery remains intact, not because it resists explanation, but because it resists simplification. If you found this exploration meaningful, consider subscribing to the channel. Each episode examines unexplained phenomena with a careful balance of evidence, skepticism, and respect for uncertainty. In the next episode, we shift from ancient stone to modern skies, investigating a very different kind of mystery. Objects observed by United States military pilots, craft that appear to maneuver in ways that defy conventional understanding of gravity and propulsion. What are they? How were they recorded? And what do they suggest about the limits of our current knowledge? That story is still unfolding. Until then, remember, some questions endure not because humanity lacks intelligence, but because reality is more complex than certainty allows.